One of the biggest questions I get asked is, how do I get into traditional archery? Unfortunately, not a lot of the pro shops anymore, if you do have a pro shop around your house, not a lot of pro shops anymore really deal with a lot of traditional people. It's a lot of compound bows, and if legal in your area, a lot of crossbows. Crossbows taking over a lot of the market nowadays. Um, but it's very hard to find a place with anybody knowledgeable on traditional archery. The unfortunate part about that is that people get a perceived notion of, well, it's traditional archery. I gotta shoot a heavy arrow. I gotta shoot a 200 grain tip. Where am I gonna find a 200 grain tip? And the unfortunate part about it is that because of the fact that the information is not readily available for people, people don't get into traditional archery. And it's one of the best things that I have done ever, hands down, is start shooting traditional. Especially with me with bow fishing, I'm always shooting instinctive year round. It's already natural to me. It's just something that just came so easy to me. Um, so by going into that, I figured I would talk about my bow and talk about kind of what I look at getting a bow. So let's take a deep dive and look at the bow I'll be hunting with for the 2024 deer season, and then I'll give you a couple more options on different things on the bow. We'll start off, this is a Bear Grizzly. This is a set at 50 pounds at 28 inches. The reason why I went with 50 pounds is just because of the fact that you can hunt any North American big game animal with a 50-pound bow. So anywhere from Alaskan moose, bears, go anywhere in the country, 50 pounds is the minimum draw weight for a couple of the states. Not all of them, obviously. There's some that's got 30, 40 pounds for just a bow in general, but 50 pounds, you can hunt anything in North America. So that's the reason why I chose it. I really like this bow just because of the fact of, so with traditional archery, I like to have a deeper grip right here. So I like to have a push-pull. So when I'm drawing back, I'm pushing and pulling at the same time to be able to hit my anchor point. What's cool about this too is it's got a flat front onto it, so that way when I do grab it, what I tend to doing is I kind of get a little bit of a compound guy draw. So you can overgrip traditional bows pretty easy. When you overgrip them, it's the same exact thing as if you have a compound bow. So what I like to do is I like to kind of set it a little bit differently, and I either two finger it, or I might have, put my knuckles onto it or barely feather it, but my palm, my palm right here is where it's sitting, and I don't grip much with the finger. So a lot of the times I'm here, just like I'd be if I had a compound. So that's the reason why I like this grip. This bow, if it is a little bit out of your price range, I think I picked it up for like 450 bucks. There is a handful of bows that's out there that is $100 bows, $120 bows that work extremely well. The things that you want to look out for is the cheaper the bows you get, kind of look at the reviews, obviously, see how they work, see if people are liking them. A lot of the times people are shooting the Black Hunter recurve or the longbow of it. That's a very, very good beginner bow. A lot of the times people are shooting, I started off with a Sage Samick. I didn't ever shoot a deer with the Samick, but I shot that bow religiously for a couple of years. And the one thing about it is that if you are unable to draw 50 pounds, this is a solid one piece that if you do get into one of those other bows, they do sell replacement limbs for like 75-100 bucks. Don't quote me on it, but they're affordable. So what could happen is that you could be shooting 35 pounds. Practice your form, practice your shooting, get an affordable bow, get something that when you draw back, you can hit your anchor point, you're releasing good, you're doing great. Then when you want to build up your strength a little bit, buy limbs that are 5 to 10 pounds heavier. It's not going to cost you the exact same price to go buy a full out bow. However, you can get a little bit stronger limbs. Now, I actually just got a question a couple days ago by my buddy Mike. So Mike asked me, is that if 40 pounds was enough to actually harvest an animal, especially a white-tailed deer. It's what we predominantly have in Michigan. 40 pounds is more than enough. I have gotten many accounts from people, and I've also seen many accounts online from people that are harvesting animals with 40-pound bows. The biggest thing with the lesser draw weight, you really got to watch out for is a lot of the times there people are still shooting your bow manufacturer basically asks you to shoot an 8 to 12 pound or 8 to 12 grain per pound arrow. So that means that at 50 pounds, they want me to shoot anywhere from, it'd be a 400 to a 600 grain arrow, is that's what they, recommend. A lot of the times, if you get into that with a 40-pound bow, well, now you're looking at a 360 grain arrow. A lot of the times too is that people like to be on a little bit of a lighter side to get a flatter trajectory. Not a problem, but once you start getting into that lighter draw weight, maybe a lighter arrow, you really got to be picky and choosy on your shot selection. I do have a buddy that has, he got a doe with a 40-pound bow and a 400 grain arrow, shooting just a 2-blade broadhead. You really got to pay attention to what you're doing. Make sure that the deer's either perfectly broadside, quartering away. Make sure your broadhead is extremely sharp, but it is possible. So what I would recommend is that if you're going to get a bow and you're looking at getting into traditional archery, 40 to 50 pounds is usually, depending on who you are, how your build is, things like that. It's a great ballpark to be in, and you don't have to spend $400 or $500, or you even look at some of the custom bows and they're asking $1,500 for a bow. You don't have to spend that much. $120, $130 bow, maybe you get a new string. A lot of the times when you get into the cheaper bows, they cheap out on the string. So a lot of the times, get yourself a custom string. It's just a normal Flemish twist string. It's like a $20, $25 string. That's it. So definitely look into getting something different on that. But other than that, as long as you're effective with it, you got perfect arrow flight, you know where you're hitting all the time, I mean, you could easily go out there and hunt deer with a 40-pound bow. I still would recommend higher, but it's definitely doable as long as you hold yourself accountable and hold yourself to the standard of, that deer's got to be 15 yards, quartering away, broadside. I got to use my little 1-inch, 2-blade broadhead that gives me the most penetration that I can get. It's extremely sharp, flies perfect. You can get it done. So that's my bow, and that would be my recommendations for bows. Next, let's look at the quiver. This is a Selway slide-on quiver. It's kind of cool because I don't know how well you'll be able to see it, but I actually got the BB Outdoors logo etched into it. This is a 6-arrow quiver. I believe they make 3, 4, 5, and 6 arrow. I got a 6 arrow just in case, the fact of if I wanted to go backpack hunting or anything else like that, I'd like to have as many arrows as I can in my quiver. So I got a 6 arrow quiver. I've never actually noticed it being a troublesome or a burden, I guess, so to speak, of having that many arrows in the quiver. It's just making sure you can fit all your broadheads in there. It's about the biggest pain of it. But other than that, I like my Selway a lot just because of the fact that it is a slide-on. I bought this, made in Michigan. This is actually a handful-year-old quiver, but it's never let me down, and it's held up for years now. So I just wanted to support a company in Michigan, and it's a good company to support. Now they do make a couple other quivers. What I like about these is, like I said, they're slide on. I believe it's Great Northern's got one that you can actually wrap around the limb of the bow. You want to make sure that it's past. So hopefully you'll be able to see it. But as you can see here, you got the limb of the bow. If your quiver is up on this skinny part of the limb, then you'll actually lose feet per second. You'll lose performance in the limbs because you have weight on it and drag. So where the limb starts to open up and go into your riser, that's where you want your quiver to be. And that's top and bottom. If not, like I said, you'll start losing speed in your limbs and performance. Another quiver I do like I said, the Great Northern, they have the wraparound ones. But what's cool about them too is they got a piece of metal that goes from the top of it to the bottom of it. So that way you can make sure everything's lined up and straight. Like I said, it's a wraparound. So that way if you need to take the quiver off and put it on a different bow, it's just boop, pop it off real fast and you're off, and you can set it on a different bow. I really like those quivers. I haven't personally owned one. I have worked on one, but it is something that I really do like. So if I was not trying to backpack hunt, especially up in the UP and things like that, I would probably go to a 3-arrow quiver. But for me, I like having the peace of mind of having 6 arrows in there. I can have 3, 4 of them broadheads, a couple judo points in case I want to get crazy and shoot at a squirrel or something. But I've never I've never had less of an arrow quiver, and I don't really think I'm ever going to have something less than a 6-arrow quiver. So that is the quiver that I use. So next, let's get into, I shoot with a finger tab. I do not like to use gloves just because of the fact of kind of like the finger slicks. So what happens is that when you shoot gloves, your hand goes onto the string. What happens is that you have a tendency to pluck it. You have a tendency to pluck it. You have a tendency to over grip it. So what happens is that that string twists. Well, what happens when that string twists, especially when you're over gripping it and things like that, is that it affects the shot. So when the arrow comes off, it's not coming off smoothly because that string's got to actually untwist before it goes. So what I like to do is that having the tab, what happens is that just gives you a clean, smooth surface in order to draw back and release. So when I draw back, yeah, I might, I could even over grip it a little bit. But when I draw back and I release, the string doesn't get over twisted or anything else like that. And it's a nice smooth release because it's just a smooth surface to be able to release that string. So that's how I like to shoot. Now this is a split finger. So what would normally happen is that your knock point would come in right here. This is a split finger tab. I shoot 3 under, but I was dabbling into split finger because that's how I bow fish, a split finger. It's just with me shooting, I shoot more or less instinctively, and with me shooting more instinctively than anything, that split finger, my gap from where my arrow is to line up from my shooting to where it was I was actually lining up here. I'm instinctive shooting, but I line up the arrow, so I guess I don't know, modified gap shooter, I guess you could call it. But so when I would draw split finger with my anchor point, I would actually be aiming like up in here. Like this is where my general position of my target would be, was way up here. But with shooting 3 under, it adjusts where my anchor point is because I anchor right here at the corner of my lip. So now I'm only, I'm down farther. I could be just above the arrow depending on how far the deer is. So it's just easier to get lined up, especially with no sights or anything. So when I draw back and I'm 3 under, I can draw back and I'm right there and I'm ready to go. So that's what I like to do, and I definitely would recommend a tab. Don't have many recommendations for which one to buy, just because of the fact of every single one I've ever bought always works. I cut this one down to actually fit my hand and fit my shooting style. So if they are a little bit big, maybe it's something that you can modify to do to make sure it fits your hand and how you shoot. But other than that, every single one I've ever used and every single one I've ever bought has always worked for me. Well, last but not least, let's talk about arrows. So this arrow right here is an arrow that I highly recommend for everybody. This is a Black Eagle Instinct. So what's cool about this arrow and what makes it so unique is the fact that it is a micro diameter arrow. Along with that, it comes with a outsert onto this. So what the outsert does onto it is that it, this is the thickest point of the arrow. So when it comes down, the broadhead comes through, the arrow, being a micro diameter arrow, will just glide through whatever you're trying to go into. You got a lot of less drag. You got a lot of less wind problems with the drag. Like I said, less drag into the target, less drag into the animal, things like that. You get a lot of penetration with these. Now, there is a lot of companies that do have outserts, but what's really unique about this arrow and with this system is that this outsert is 100 grains. So what a lot of your standard outserts or inserts come into is they're usually a lot of aluminum inserts. It's the easiest way to make the arrow cheaper. The aluminum inserts are usually no more than 25 grains with a lot of cases, with a lot of arrows. With this being a 100 grain outsert, I automatically get my front of center. So like I mentioned before, is that people want a heavier arrow for traditional archery. And the one thing about a heavier arrow is that you either have to come up with it some way. You either need a very heavy grains per inch shaft, or you need a very heavy tip or an outsert system. So the thing with that is that your grains per inch on a lot of your carbon arrows are going to be anywhere from usually 7 to 11 grains per inch. I mean, don't quote me on everything, but that's where a lot of your arrows are going to sit, is about 7 to 11. Once you get into aluminum arrows, you can get up into that, 12 grains per inch and things like that, but you still run into the problem of got to use a heavyweight tip. What's cool about this is that having a 100 grain outsert, if you were shooting an arrow and you had, a 25 grain insert and then you had a 150 grain tip, well, your front half of your arrow only weighs 175 grains. It's only going to give you a little bit of front of center. What's cool about this is that with me shooting this, I can shoot a 100 grain outsert with a 100 grain tip, and I'm already at 200 grains just with a 100 grain tip, and that's what this is, a 100 grain tip. So already having my front of center with a micro diameter arrow, this is a very good penetrating arrow. What I like about it too is that having a 100 grain tip, I can go to any bow shop, and the industry standard for broadheads is a 100 grain tip. So I have the opportunity to get my broadheads at any bow shop I go to. It doesn't matter if I'm here in state or if I travel to a different state, I can always try to find broadheads that would suit my needs. If you were shooting a 175 or 200 grain tip, the problem that you're going to run into is the fact that not every broadhead or not every company is going to have a 200 grain tip on their shelf, 175 grain tip on their shelf. So a lot of that happens, or when that happens, you have to pre-order everything that you're going to buy. You also have to make sure you have enough with you, just in case if something goes wrong, you go, oh crap, I can't find broadheads, or I'm out of broadheads. I would hate to be done with a hunt because of the fact that something happened to my broadheads and I can't go get more. With these, I go to the local, anywhere I'm at, I go to the closest bow shop and I can find broadheads. I can find tips. So that's the reason why I shoot these. This is the Black Eagle Instinct at 500 spine. And I mean, the 350 spine I shot last year comes with the same exact system, so it all works out in the end. I personally like to shoot 3-inch. I go back and forth in between shield cut. These are shield cut and parabolic fletchings, but I like to fletch my own arrows. I like them to be bright yellow. Don't ask me why. Since I've been fletching since I was a teenager, I've always done bright yellow. It was always 5-inch parabolic bright yellow. Then I started shooting shield cut, and I'm like, wow, these look pretty cool. They fly pretty good, so I started doing shield cut, but it's always going to be bright yellow. Just because of the fact, too, is that it's easy to see blood. It's easy to find your arrow. There's a lot of the times where if I'm shooting, and obviously if I'm shooting from a tree stand, I have an angle, I can always find my fletching, especially if I'm not shooting a lighted nock. For hunting purposes, I am going to use a lighted nock for filming and everything too. But it works out for me. Use any color you want. Use 5-inch, 3-inch, 4-inch, whatever you want. I mean, as long as you're getting perfect arrow flight and a sharp broadhead at the end, you're going to be able to harvest game. But that is the arrow of my choice. So this arrow weighs 470 grains with the lighted nock into it, which is my lightest traditional archery setup that I have ever shot. I've always been a heavy arrow guy. Usually my lightest arrows were 525, 550-ish. Going all the way up into, I hunted last year with 630 grains, and I've made arrows and hunted with them at 680 grains even. I've always been a heavyweight guy. Depending on how I'm shooting at that time, with a heavier arrow, my trajectory might be shorter. However, my gap from where my arrow is to my target at, I don't shoot past 20 yards really. So my gap at 15, 20 yards is just above my arrow. So the only thing I got to do is draw back. I put my arrow right below its vitals. I know, where my gap is and everything. I shoot, I'm good. We're doing great. Made me a really accurate bow hunter. So not something that you should look away from if if your gap's a little bit too big. You know, go to a heavier arrow, try to shorten that gap up, change your anchor point, things like that. But this is a 470 grains, like I said, my lightest arrow, and I'm getting beautiful arrow flight out of it. It's a flat trajectory. Got incredibly sharp broadheads I'm going to be putting onto them. I am looking at multiple different broadheads, so I'll let you guys know what broadheads I fully go with, or maybe I'll have a couple of them, different kinds set in the quiver. But incredibly sharp broadheads, maybe a little bit lighter arrow, and I'm really excited to see what it does this year. So that is my bow setup, and that's basically what I look at for arrows, my bow, quiver, things like that, and different things that I would recommend. So if you have any questions, please go down to the comment section, ask me a question. I'm willing to help anybody. Please ask me a question. If you like the video, maybe you learned something, don't forget to give it a like, don't forget to give it a subscribe, and hopefully I can see you next time on BB Outdoors.